Well, welcome everybody. I am Abby Garrison. I'm the Vice President here at United Way of Venture Forward, and we are just so thankful that you're all here today with us. This is a big group. I think we got some interesting stuff to talk about, right? Um, Before we get going, I did just want to take a moment and just let you guys know a little bit more about Venture Forward. I know obviously you're here, so you know something about us, but just to kind of clarify what all we do. So Venture Forward, we are a part of United Way here in Chattanooga, but we serve all nonprofits in the region. So we are here really as kind of a technical assistance backbone organization to help you guys amplify your impact. So, a couple of the ways that we do that through Venture Forward is learning opportunities like today. We also have a host of other educational webinars on different topics. We also do that through our innovation and collaboration programs to help you guys come together and solve the really tough challenges in our community. And more, we're really trying to also support you guys through advocacy. So I think you'll continue to see more stuff come out of Venture Forward around advocating for our sector as a whole, advocating for nonprofits as a major employer and a big driver of both the mission-based work that you guys do, but also the economy here in Tennessee, Southeast Tennessee. So, so with that, I really would invite you all, if you're new to Venture Forward, definitely make sure that you follow us on social, but also be sure you're signed up for our newsletters as stuff like this CARES Act the piece and more advocacy stuff comes along. We're definitely going to be sending out more alerts and more real-time communication through our e-communication tools. So you can do that on our website, ventureforwardnow.org, at the bottom right-hand corner in the footer. That's how you sign up for our newsletter. So if you're not signed up, I really encourage you to do that. Really just because it's a great communication tool with all of y'all. So with that, I think we will shift into today's topic at hand. I know that most of y'all have heard, you're here, so you must have heard that the governor announced last week that they're going to be making available $150 million to our nonprofit community across Tennessee. That's an allocation out of the $2.1 billion, I believe, that was allocated to the entire state by the federal government. And they've chosen to push it out to our nonprofit community via the DHS department at the state level. So they announced that last week, and honestly, we kind of thought we'd have more information by today. No one has seen the application, but there is some guidance that's been provided on the DHS website, as well as some releases that they've made that Jim is here to just kind of walk you guys through, and then as best he can answer questions you might have. But full disclosure on his behalf, he knows as much as he has access to what you guys have access to. So so yeah, they haven't released that yet. So we will do our best to kind of provide you guys some guidance. But just know that DHS themselves will be rolling out quite a bit more guidance in the coming days. I do have one kind of announcement to make to you guys that they at DHS shared with us, which is that, and this is kind of a big deal, that there is going to be an application period. So applications are going to be accepted on a first come, first serve basis, but that doesn't mean they're going to be awarded on a first come, first serve basis. So I know a lot of y'all have been really scrambling to get ready for the 12:01 a.m. Friday night, submission of your application that you don't even know what you're applying yet. It sounds like that is not something that you have to be worried about, that in fact, you're going to have a period to apply over the next several weeks. So that's huge news and really a burden off, I think, for all of us from the anxiety and the stress surrounding this whole thing. So the other thing that they've told us is that they are going to be sending out information on trainings for nonprofits to help you guys apply, as well as more FAQs and guidance. It's sounding like those trainings are going to be starting next week. So, but they haven't been announced yet. So definitely, as soon as we hear that, we will share that out to you guys. I'm sure they'll publish it on their website as well. And it sounds like they're also making lots of announcements via Twitter. If you are a Twitter user, follow DHS on Twitter. So with that, I am going to quit talking and hand it off to Jim. Jim Catanzaro is a partner here at Chambliss Law Firm. He specifically specializes in nonprofit and the kind of social sector. He heads up their work group within Chambliss on that. I know he's probably advised many of you and your boards on things across the community, but he is just a wealth of information and experience. And he also serves on Venture Forward's advisory board. So we thank him for that time commitment as well. So with that, Jim, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate that, Abby. I'm gonna follow up a little bit on what Abby just mentioned, just to talk a little bit about mechanics. You know, as we know, the first phase of the Community Cares Act was that there would be quote unquote partner agencies that would apply. And they, of course, would administer allocated grant monies to what we'll call sub-grant requestors. And what has really impacted this process, of course, is that we still don't know exactly who those partner agencies are. So in addition to the good news that Abby announced, which is that there will be, instead of having a first come, first serve, just, you know, free for all, in which no one seeking what's called a response and recovery grant would not even really know to whom they're applying, what the application would look like until they opened it, you know, at 12:01 a.m., you know, on August 1, that there is going to be this period where there's a rollout of the partner agencies, if you will, and they, alongside the Department of Human Services, will be providing information to those who might seek the grants about, you know, what's their application process look like, and what are the instructions for proceeding in that fashion. So it's tremendously good news that there will be the opportunity for those who might seek those grants to take a look at and not worry that if they're not in, you know, immediately, that somehow they're not going to be able to participate. So just following along and maybe adding some additional thoughts on that, I thought that was an extremely significant announcement. I'm sure all of you do too. With that said, I think it's interesting, you know, you talk about what is it we can do at this point to be ready. One of the things that I think all of you can do, if you haven't already, is to study very carefully what services, and I love the term that was used in the announcement, which is these are the services, the kind of response services, I'll call them, that are prioritized and encouraged. So, and they go through a number of different COVID-related response services that your agencies might have provided or plan to provide. Now, one thing that's significant, and I'm going to stop here and mention that the grant that you could be eligible to receive would cover expenses from March 1 through December 30 of this year. So when you look at the list of services that are encouraged and prioritized that you either have offered or might plan to offer that relate to responses to COVID-19 related impacts, those are the expenses that are eligible for reimbursement from the grant terms. And now obviously too, when you're applying, I think one of the things that you're going to want to do is obviously to link what you either have done or what you plan to do very carefully with the curative or responsiveness to COVID-related conditions that your agency is addressing. Now, one other element that I think is interesting in this is, you talk about these are response and recovery grants. I was reading an article, apparently out of the Tennessee businesses that applied for and got PPP loans, only 4% of those were nonprofit organizations. Pretty low representation. So they have added one of the elements that you can obtain grant assistance for under this program would be simply the reimbursement of your expenses incurred for whether it's maintaining payroll or whether it's securing PPE or taking quote unquote other measures that either accommodate or protect employees or the public that consumes your service. Given the priority for COVID-related services, I would say, I would encourage you, if you plan as part of, or maybe even the entirety of your grant application, to focus on what I call recovery, the recovery side, which is we've incurred all these extraordinary expenses and we need relief from that. I think you then would want to be in a position from a grant application standpoint to show the impacts those expenses have had on COVID-related conditions in our community, or that will impact and ameliorate or deal with those conditions as we move forward. Again, when you talk about applications, even though we've been given this guidance that we're not going to be in a free-for-all and a feeding frenzy, nonetheless, you're talking about dollars allocated to this area, which we understand at this point, which would be roughly an 11-county area, including Hamilton. You're talking about maybe $30 to $40 million total, with grants ranging from $25,000 up to $1 million. Apparently those maybe even beyond $1 million that get special review by the Department of Human Services. But anything from $25,000 to $1 million will really be administered in its entirety by the partner agency, whichever agency that is here in our community. And so you're going to need to be very careful about demonstrating how your particular service or recovery and its relationship to COVID is a priority, or why it's a priority. So to the extent that you can, at this point within your management team and your board leadership, come up with, I think, very specific points, because you don't know what the application looks like at this point, but so you can come up with your own bullet points about what is it you've done, what is it you plan to do, and what are the actual, from an input-output standpoint, what is it that can be either expected as a result or a benefit, or as I mentioned a moment ago, to the extent that it's related perhaps to payroll expenses or other special working conditions that have resulted from providing COVID-related relief, describing how that worked. For example, in the latter case, I think you want to be in a position in your grant application to demonstrate, we had these extraordinary circumstances providing whatever relief it is, let's say it's food, to a population that was affected by the COVID-related conditions, the lack of employment or jobs. We had to pay extra, or we had to secure these other expenses to line up volunteers, and we need relief. That's the kind, I think, of fundamental or foundational work you're really going to want to think through at this point and document, so that you can pivot and adjust once you get the application and know, at least in advance, I can take some of this foundational information and now I can tailor it and put it into the grant application format and support, my application request. And of course, now we know too, even though you preliminarily will do this thinking, once you get the application, you will have the opportunity to adjust and not have to stress about just simply winging it and getting your application in as fast as possible. So I think those are a couple key points. And interestingly enough, I don't know how many of you have been to the sources or resources been made available on the internet, but one of the sources cross-links to the Treasury Department's page that addresses this state stimulus. It's a $150 billion program, but they address specifically limitations on what end uses of the monies might be. And there's a little bit more detail there, not a lot, but there's a little bit more detail there as you look through what your application and your intended uses for the monies might be. I would encourage you to go to that site. It's actually linked in one of the two Tennessee resources that's available on the internet right now. Go on that site and look, and you'll see, for example, there's this guidance that if you're planning again on, this is again on the recovery side, you're not going to be allowed, so you shouldn't propose to reimburse expenses that relate to severances or bonuses. Now, hazard pay is carved out of that. So again, if you've had somebody working overtime or you provided additional pay because of, hazardous circumstances, facing, risk as an employee, those might be reimbursable expenses. But do take the time and look at that and make sure you tailor your document, your application once it's available, so that you're not eliminating at least parts of your grant application by asking for something that cannot be done. Some of the other thoughts around this process, I think, when you talk about readiness, many of you probably already know some of these steps, but to the extent that you can, I think all of having the documents ready that you need, your 990s, your financials, your determination letter, board bios, all of those kinds of resource documents, whether you need those or not, and it remains to be seen, but I would encourage you, of course, to gather and have available in electronic format all of that information. Have all of that information at your fingertips as ready as possible, so that you're not scrambling. Again, even with the additional time that you have, I think it's wise to go ahead and get the foundational work out of the way now, so that you can really spend the time focusing on how you're going to tailor your application and think through what it is that you're going to present that would receive this kind of prioritized treatment by a grant funding partner agency in their processes. Because of course, they're going to be getting all kinds of applications, and everybody probably is going to be advancing some sort of need. So why is yours in particular one to be prioritized? What level of service are you reaching school children and education concerns? Are you reaching any of these other concerns that are listed here in the Tennessee documents that are the priority services? So those are my preliminary comments. And as Abby mentioned, we hoped by this day that we would have some other valuable information or guidance from our friends at DHS or out of the governor's office, and we don't. We'll get that apparently on August 1, at least on some level. And then we'll get some more from our partner agencies once that rolls out. And so I think we can expect this sort of evolutionary process that steps us toward, I hope, a full and fair process so that everyone can put their best foot forward. So those are my preliminary comments, and throw it open for questions at this point. And I guess I'd ask maybe Patrick, are we going to retrieve those out of the chat? Are we going to throw it open?
Yes, I've captured a few here, so I'll go ahead and kind of go through these top to bottom that we've captured. If we received PPP loans through the CARES Act, would we still be eligible for this Tennessee Community CARES Act?
You would, but you'd have to be careful that you didn't duplicate uses of the funds. For example, PPP funds, of course, are used primarily for payroll expenses and some overhead in addition. You're not eligible, if you go to the Treasury site, to take these Community CARES Act monies and double dip, essentially, to go and use them for the same purposes. But you would not be excluded from applying for grant assistance, for example, that would help you provide responsive services or to reimburse other expenses that were not addressed by your PPP loan.
The next one is similar. It says we received relief
Hold on,
from.
I have a Patrick. Let me
yeah,
on that.
go ahead. Sure.
Jim, PPP had a kind of an end date for when it
Yes.
was eligible for. Do we have any kind of sense for, like, would payroll be eligible if it's after that end date? Or maybe we don't know yet.
Don't know yet, although at this point, it seems to be that expenses incurred after December 30 would not be eligible for reimbursement. Now, the key phrase there is incurred. And we're told by, at least from our friends at the state of Tennessee, that incurred, it doesn't mean necessarily that you have stroked a check or there has been an electronic transaction that's occurred. It's the actual, it's kind of like accrual accounting almost. You've incurred the debt and the circumstances are complete around that. So for example, if you perhaps incurred a rent obligation on, say, December 29, but you didn't pay it till January 1 or 2, that might be, and I'm underscoring might, be eligible as a reimbursable expense. We're going to get more guidance on those issues, but right now, that's the guidance that we have available from Tennessee and the Treasury Department. So as you look at reimbursable expenses, it's March 1, and interesting, isn't it? December 30, not 31st. Not sure why they made that choice, but PPP, of course, runs through December 31 now. So strange.
I think they never learned the knuckle trick.
All right, the next question is similar. It said we received relief funds from HHS stimulus for providers. Can we still be eligible for this?
And I'll have to preface this with saying, I haven't reviewed the terms of the HHS. I'm assuming they're talking about the Medicare recovery funds for healthcare providers. I haven't separately reviewed that as to whether that excludes accepting relief under other programs, but there's nothing within the Community CARES Act which would exclude that nonprofit from applying. So with that caveat, which is, I'd want to be sure to review the stimulus on the HHS side to look at exclusions. Otherwise, though, I don't see anything within this program that would exclude them.
Okay. Another question came, it says, would this type of grant trigger a single audit if our organization doesn't already have to have one?
Yes, I think if I remember correctly, the dollar amount, and someone may correct me, I believe it's $750,000 that requires the single audit, the additional level of audit. So potentially it could, depending on the level of grant assistance. And I'm not sure, obviously, for that particular nonprofit, what other grant assistance they receive and whether it would be triggered or not. But I think they're wise to ask the question. And I would probably go to your CPA, those that help you prepare your 990 and that might otherwise help you with a single audit. And once you get, assuming you do, hopefully, get some additional grant assistance and ask that question.
This next question comes from Mary Howard at Songbirds. Do you know if we need a breakdown of taxes paid quarterly this calendar year, or is it too early to tell since the application has not been released?
Yeah, I wish I could provide guidance on that. Just don't know yet. We don't have any information on that. And when they talk about taxes, they're talking about employment. I'm assuming on the employer side, and withholdings on for the employee. You know, I don't think it's a bad idea to have that information handy if that's part of your request. If you're seeking the recovery side, which is reimbursement of, you know, these are payroll expenses that must relate to COVID-related conditions, by the way. These are not ordinary. So if you've incurred those expenses, keeping people on the payroll, for example, similar to kind of a PPP loan kind of circumstance, those are eligible apparently. That's, again, best information we have at this point. I'd want to have, yes, your 941s available as possible to demonstrate to whomever you're applying, you know, these are the expenses that we've incurred. And again, tying those back to impacts and benefits related to COVID-19 circumstances. So
Okay, I have a couple questions here around geography. Are applications geographically limited, like to certain counties? You had also mentioned something about 11 counties. Do you know which 11 counties those are?
I can't list them off the top of my head. I know, and this is a bit anecdotal. We don't have anything definitive from our friends at the state. I will have to not disclose my source, but I am told, understand that this is the way they're attempting to divvy up the money around the state, that there will be the partner agencies, maybe 4 to 5 in total. At least, again, that's our best knowledge at this point. And that they will be responsible for administering the grant dollars within, say, a region. And the expectation was that in our particular corner of the state, that would be roughly an 11 county area. But please don't quote me on that, because that, as I say, is a bit anecdotal. Mm-hmm. It could be that it's a larger number. And as far as which counties comprise the 11, I don't know that I can recite those off the top of my head.
I think some of that information is gonna be released once everything's kind of nailed down with the administrative agencies. So, just to clarify, are organizations only eligible for this program if they provide direct COVID-19 relief services to the community?
That seems to be the preference, but to say only, I wouldn't say that necessarily. Again, I think when you talk about prioritized and encouraged, what does that mean? I'm not really sure. You know, we can all argue about what you do and how it impacts COVID-related conditions. I think in this particular process, I would encourage you all to apply. There is nothing, this is not a PPP as far as we know at this point. You know, PPP, of course, required certifications. And then, of course, after the fact, our friends at Treasury and SBA on PPP said, well, now we're going to audit. And we're going to, you know, take a Monday morning, quarterback kind of view of whether you really met the certifications for need or not. At least at this point, it doesn't appear that will be the same process applicable for grant applications submitted to the partner agencies. Now, again, I say that, excuse me, conditioned on, we don't know yet. We don't have the application. We don't know what certifications, if any, the grant partner agencies would impose, or that DHS would require that they impose. But right now, it appears as though the emphasis is on, let's make sure that the nonprofits are applying, and then it's up to the partner agencies to decide what, how do we allocate the dollars, what's really a need that we want to support forward, or, that we want to allow reimbursable expenses for since March 1. So I would say at this point, I don't think you're excluded, and I would think apply, and it would be more a process of, what's going to be prioritized with limited dollars going forward.
Good. We have a question from Linda just asking, what's the best website to follow up for information? I'll just preface that to say that we have a landing page on the Venture Forward website that we're going to constantly be updating as we get more information, but directly you can also go to the DHS link or website landing page for Tennessee.gov. We'll post those in the chat as well. Do you have any other suggestions, Jim, on that?
I don't. I'm looking here and you touched upon them. There are really two. Let me also commend, when you open one of the two links that Patrick's going to make available in the chat box, you'll see there are linked within one of the documents the information available from the United States Department of Treasury. That's worth a read too, as I mentioned a moment ago, because it does give a little, not a ton, but it does give some additional detail around limitations on grants that you'll want to read and be aware of when you do get your application and look to submit. But generally, you've got two documents. One's directly from the governor's office, and the other is from the Department of Human Services.
We have several more questions to go through, so just be patient as we try to hit all of yours, everybody. Hopefully we'll get to yours, and if not, just so you know, we will try to follow up with some of these questions. We may even post them on that landing page for future people, okay? For agencies that run or are expanding employment training programs, is that a priority area, would you think, for this?
I do. It appears that workforce training is, in fact, a priority. So, yeah, in short, I would say yes. Now, again, and I think, in this environment, it really is about, how is it we're retraining or providing the kind of job training that will help people adjust and within COVID-related economic circumstances, find new employment or just employment. So yes, to answer briefly.
Okay, this is a follow-up on the PPP again. PPP payroll was to go through the end of June, then it got expended, but we may have used up our payroll dollars by then. So new payroll dollars could be used, say, from July to November. I think that's a question.
Yes, I think that's right. As long as you're not double dipping, using the Tennessee Community Cares Act dollars to reimburse expenses, and then in turn using your PPP dollars for something else, or in essence, trying to get yourself ahead of the game for expenses that PPP loans were made for, I think that's perfectly fine. So if you could show the end of your covered period for PPP, and then after that, you use the monies for expenses, including payroll, that followed that period, I think that would be appropriate.
Do you know if this grant can be used to cover payroll for staff who are required to quarantine and who cannot work remotely?
I would think so. Again, don't have a ton of detail, but when you look at the guidance that's provided, I would say that's specifically what this is intended to do. When you talk about recovery, it sure sounds like that would be something from a nonprofit standpoint that you could legitimately seek recovery assistance with. Because it says specifically, to the extent that you included, had payroll conditions related to whether it's additional accommodations, protections for workers, or just simply accommodating, in that case, people working remotely, or furloughed workers, and you didn't otherwise cover those with PPP loan funds, then yes, I would say those seem to qualify.
This is an interesting question that may apply to several on here. Our organization is statewide with offices in various cities like Memphis, Nashville, Chattanooga, Knoxville. Do you expect that we will need to apply individually for each region instead of a statewide application?
Wow, that is a great question.
It is.
You know, I am not sure if they might structure it this way, which would be, to the extent that you have a quote unquote home or principal office, that you would apply in that region, with the idea that you would probably describe and explain that, you know, resources or grant dollars would be used in other parts of the state. That's one possibility. The other is, and I could certainly see this, which is to say, wait a second, you know, the allocation was to have monies that would apply to Southeast Tennessee. So to the extent that you're talking about, you know, grant dollars being used elsewhere, then yes, you know, you might have to apply in multiple regions, and not just one. What is the answer to that? I can't give you further guidance, but if you ask me my gut, given the, I think the desire to make sure that that a certain amount of the allocation is actually used in a particular area of the state, I would expect to be more likely that you'd have to apply in multiple locations. But that's just my gut.
This one is, can you tell us a bit more about the deobligation date of November 15th? And what does that mean in comparison to the incurred expenses end date of December 30th? Wow.
Great question. One I have myself. And I apologize. I'm going to have to punt a bit here. I have the same question. And I don't know, because you're right. You know, if you otherwise look at the guidance provided where it does state specifically that expenses incurred through December 30 would be eligible, it doesn't make sense. I don't know if that means we're not obligated as a granting agency to fund anything beyond the deobligation date, although you may use those benefits or proceeds to reimburse expenses incurred through December 30. That might be what they mean. But again, that's Jim's gut. Mm-hmm. Sorry, best I have.
Okay. Can you also clarify the timeline for applying? Still seems to be a little bit confusion around this first come, first served basis, or when applications are going to be processed and all that.
Yeah, another great question. And you're right. There's ambiguity and confusion around it. You know, initially, of course, the announcement was we're opening the floodgates on August 1. First come, first serve. So you better get your application in, or that seemed to be the implication. So everybody, of course, has been scrambling without any information to say, well, gosh, what do we do? And anecdotally, I think I passed on earlier, and Abby did too, our information. And you know, this is for what it's worth at this point, but we think these are reputable sources, have advised us, well, while the application process will be opened on August 1, it doesn't mean that the grants will be processed in order of submission from that point forward. So that, in other words, you know, if you got your application in, let's say it was 1203, you kept trying to hit submit, and it wouldn't accept till 1203, and somehow somebody got in at 1201, that they'd have priority over you. That's what we're told. Instead, what we're being advised is that there will be further guidance in an application document, at least in some sort of format, that'll be made available, so that there will be this opportunity for you to study and consider and then submit. Now, how long is that process? For example, what point after August 1 would the application process be closed? We don't know. There's no guidance. And again, we're hampered because we don't know who the partner agencies are at this point. We don't even know who they are. So when you talk about, the announcement originally said, you'll get guidance from the Department of Human Services and the partner agencies. Well, we don't have partner agencies, at least yet. Maybe we'll later today. I hope so. But so all of that remains a bit murky. So to answer your question, there's good news in this sense only, which is it's apparently not a free-for-all for getting everything in right at 1201 on August 1. Beyond that, what period of time do you have? We don't know. And hopefully there's guidance available that gives you a sense at that point of what time period you do have and who you're working with.
And then the awards, do you know when they're going to be issued?
Could you say that again?
When will awards be issued? Do we have any?
Don't know yet.
Okay.
Again, a major piece missing here is what are the processes that will really apply from our partner agencies that are going to administer these grants. And we don't know. What are their time periods? What has DHS set maybe as an outside, period beyond the de-identification, or de-obligation, time period, which again, we don't fully know what that means. So to further confuse things, I hope, if nothing else, all of you take from this that at least you're all in similar circumstances, and there isn't some insider knowledge that some agency miraculously has out there. At least I haven't seen it, that could allow them to put their best foot forward so much faster than anybody else. That doesn't appear to be the case. We're all equally confused.
I know, guys, we have about 13 minutes left. We're going to try to hit at many of these questions as we can before time runs out. And again, the ones that we don't capture, we will try to follow up with those individuals or post them on our website landing page at ventureforwardnow.org. So this one is about the partner agencies, or those agencies that are going to be distributing funds. Once they are announced, do we expect that each will have the same, or will they have different application forms?
Very good question. And I hate to keep repeating this, again, we don't know yet, but you would think that it would make sense to have uniformity or consistency. What does that entail? Does that mean that as a partner agency, I am designing an application that gets approval by DHS, or is it the reverse, which is DHS says to me as the partner agency, here is the application you will use? I don't know. I do think they're going to want, from a DHS perspective, a level playing field. So to take that question that was posed a few minutes ago about an agency with offices in multiple parts of the state, it would seem very unfair to require them to go through a very different application process just because they were in a different region, for example.
Okay. Are the partner agencies the ones who are going to be making the funding decisions, or are they just doing the administration of the funds?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that they are going to be making funding decisions. The dollars will actually flow directly from DHS. What's different, we're told, is these really large grant requests. If there's going to be a grant requested over $1 million, that's going to be a DHS call. But grants that range from 25,000, excuse me, to $1 million should be within criteria established and considered by the partner agency.
Okay. Would you think that a scholarship program for college students might be considered as a priority for this?
Yes, again, to the extent it would relieve COVID-related impacts. That's, I think, what you'd want to tie it to, which is that the scholarship dollars, they don't have to be specifically characterized for that purpose, but yet impact that. That the lack of other scholarship dollars or loans or other monetary support that could assist those seeking a college education, that these dollars would go to alleviate that. I think that yes, that would be arguably a prioritized and encouraged type of service. Now, does that relate on the same level as school-aged children? That was the terminology used by the DHS in their particular document, was support for school-aged children. Maybe not, but I don't know what that term means. In my mind, it kind of connotes the primary, secondary kind of education, but maybe that's not right. We don't know what they mean by that yet.
Okay. For organizations like child care centers that add services for school-aged children, or organizations that perhaps offer virtual learning labs for their staff due to COVID, would those additional costs be applicable?
I think so, yeah. Again, subject to some of the limitations that we're going to learn more about. You're talking about recovery, assistance, or the plan to continue to provide those services forward, then I would sure think so. But, let's be honest, what I think and what your partner agencies consider as a priority may be two different things. I can certainly make an argument. I'm a lawyer, so this is what I do. But I just want people to understand when you ask that kind of question, I unfortunately can't give you, this is what DHS thinks, or this is what partner agencies describe in their support documentation, because we don't have it yet. So I'm giving you, my read on the limited resources that we have and what might or might not apply. How the partner agency would view it and what priority level they give it, I don't know that.
This is a question I think a lot of people might have. If money can be used until December, we might have to estimate our expenses in certain areas. Any thoughts on how we might be penalized or how we would account for actual versus estimated expenses?
Yeah, and when they're talking about estimated, projecting what those costs might be, again, the key language that I've seen is incurred. So I think that's the part you're really going to want to focus on, which is what are those expenses? And if you're estimating what is incurred, I think ultimately, if you're going to comply with grant terms, you're going to have to show how these are reimbursable. They use that term throughout this document, reimbursable. So you might make projections and you might make estimates, but at the end of the day, your documentation showing expense incurred, payment made, and then reimbursement of that is the critical part, I think, to showing compliance with grant terms. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Do you know if the award is going to be reimbursement style or lump sum or how, or those sort of things?
Don't know yet. That's a very good question, which is, yeah, are you given a lump sum and then after the fact accounting for it to show compliance? Are you submitting instead as an alternative, some form of here are expenses incurred and now reimburse us for those? Good question. Don't know.
Okay. And again, I think people are just wanting to get clarity about where the money is eligible and what's not eligible here. So this again relates a little bit more around the aspect about COVID relief here. It says for a lot of us, the issue is a loss of revenue caused by COVID that allowed us to provide basic services or just even stay open. Does this mean only new direct COVID related expenses will be covered?
It doesn't mean new because it dates back to March 1, but this is not a revenue replacement grant as far as we can tell at this point. It does seem to say specifically, again, to the extent you have expenses that relate to these kind of prioritized recovery or response actions, those can be reimbursed. I would want to show if you obviously have had the reduction in revenue, but have otherwise taken steps to secure employees or to provide services, then I think based on what we have available now, those are reimbursable. Now we may find on August 1, we found this with PPP. We had a statute with PPP with at least some guidance. We got nothing here, right, except in 2 announcements. But then we found through SBA and Treasury, they issued all these rules, changed things on us, probably twice, maybe 3 times, but provided a lot more guidance and really answered a lot of open questions, some of which were not really intuitive from the statute itself. We may very well find that part of this process and that our partner agencies want to address with the consent of DHS is a true recovery, which could be revenue replacement. I just don't see that here in these announcements at this point.
I think we're going to hit all the questions. How about that? We have one more. Do you know anything about the Tennessee CAMS or TN CAMS system that the state is going to be using to do reports?
No, I don't. I haven't gone through it. I'm curious as well. Be interesting to see. I'm sorry, that's not much of an answer, but I don't have one there.
That is it to this point.
Okay.
Jim, I think we went through them right in time. It's 10:57.
Wow. Fantastic.
Okay, so we're going to post a couple links in here just as a reminder that we have recorded this webinar. So if you're like, oh, what did he say about that one question? You'll be able to access this webinar. We'll post it in our website landing page or on our blog at ventureforwardnow.org. We will also try to link it in a follow-up email to those who have registered for this webinar as well. If you have further questions, please don't hesitate to send them our way as well. Part of what our job is right now is to try to advocate for you guys and try to understand and do a little bit of outreach. So feel free to email us, ventureforward@uwchat.org. We'll do what we can. Abby, I'm not sure if you're able to join back in here if you wanted to say anything else.
I was just going to add that DHS has made it pretty clear on their website that if you have specific questions, to shoot them an email. I put it up in the chat earlier, but I would recommend you do that because it does seem like this still is a fluid process. And I would imagine that the questions that you guys ask are directly impacting the application, right? And the compliance with it. So I would just be my recommendation to send them emails directly to if you have concerns or questions.
And I'll mention quickly, because we have done that, Abby, to follow up on that. Right now, you'll get a bounce back email, which will say that due to the volume of questions, we can't respond to you right now. But yes, queue your questions up and make sure that you get your questions in. I agree wholeheartedly, and hopefully soon they will be in a position to respond to you.
Well, on behalf of Venture Forward, just thank you for helping us moderate and facilitate these questions, Jim. As you guys can tell, Jim is a huge advocate for our region and for our nonprofits. He does this because he loves the mission and the impact that you all make in our community, as do we. And so just appreciate, Jim, you taking the time to answer the questions as best as you possibly can.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And again, if you have any more follow-up questions for our team, again, we'll post our email in the chat. Feel free to follow up with us. Thank you all for joining. We hope you have a wonderful day, and God bless. Thanks.
Thank you.